This story is not just an excursion into the everyday life of a medieval city. It's also an exploration of what it means to be human in an era where every morning begins with shame and ends in exhaustion, where filth and disease go hand in hand with greed and superstition, and where hope is more a bad habit than a virtue. There's no place for pretty illusions here, only harsh reality, delivered with a dose of dark humor. Welcome to a world where even the most ordinary day can end in tragedy, or more often, in nothing at all. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, settle in. We're about to begin. You wake up before the sun even thinks about crawling over the horizon, but the darkness around you feels thick and never ending, almost as if it is another heavy, moist blanket pressed down upon your chest. Not that you would know what a proper blanket feels like, of course. Instead, you have your beloved sack of straw, lumpy, scratchy, and full of small, invisible creatures who seem to have chosen your bed for their nightly parties. Every inch of your skin itches, and you cannot remember a single night when you have not awoken to the sensation of tiny, busy legs exploring the landscape of your body. Your nose twitches first. The smell of dampness, rot, and human filth is so strong that you wonder, for the hundredth time, if perhaps the gods had designed your nostrils simply to torture you. There is the unmistakable aroma of mold growing merrily in the corners of your single, windowless room. The straw underneath you is only slightly less rotten than the scraps of clothing you wear to bed, and sometimes you imagine the straw itself is fermenting into something new and monstrous. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor snores, a wet, bubbling noise, like a frog drowning in a pond of phlegm. You listen for a moment, half hoping the noise will stop, but it never does. You do not bother stretching. The last time you tried, your back locked up so badly you could barely move for a week. Instead, you sit up slowly, peeling yourself away from the straw as gently as possible so as not to disturb the nest of lice and fleas that have made a fine home in your bedding. Your shirt clings to your skin, and you can feel the cold bite of the morning air, which somehow always manages to find its way in, no matter how many rags you have shoved into the cracks in the walls. Your feet hit the floorboards, which are as damp and sticky as everything else. Once you stepped on a dead rat here, and you have never forgotten the sound it made. Every day since, you have moved carefully, your toes exploring ahead, just in case. There is no candle. You cannot waste wax on mornings like this. So you fumble your way to the corner, guided by memory and the faint glow of moonlight that sneaks through the warped door. Here, you find your boots, or rather, what passes for boots. Two mismatched lumps of leather, soaked through and stinking of last year's mud. You slide your feet in, suppressing a shudder as something cold and possibly alive brushes against your ankle. You decide not to think about it. The room is quiet except for the chorus of snores from the rooms beyond, and the occasional soft scurrying in the walls. Perhaps it is mice. Perhaps it is something worse. You consider, as you do every morning, that you are lucky to have a roof at all. Many sleep in the gutters or under rotting carts, their faces pressed into the refuse of the town. At least here, you have the illusion of privacy, even if it is mostly shared with vermin and the ghosts of better days. You stand and stretch your arms, this time not too far, feeling the brittle ache in your bones. Your joints pop, protesting the beginning of another day. You look around, trying to remember if you left anything valuable out, though valuable is a relative term. A chipped comb, a length of twine, a wooden spoon, and a cracked mirror made from burnished metal. You gather them all, stuffing them into your satchel, each item sticky and cold, as if the objects themselves resent being used. You think about your mother, briefly, and how she used to say that morning was a time for hope. You stifle a laugh. Here, morning is a time for resignation. You wonder if she would have recognized you now, with your hollow eyes and thin frame, your hands rough and stained, your beard growing wild because you simply cannot bear to waste your own meager skills on yourself. Through the thin walls, you hear the first dog bark, a low, miserable sound. Soon, there will be shouting in the streets. The early vendors shouting about bread and fish and the inevitable fight between the two brothers who run the tavern. You sigh, knowing that these sounds mark the start of your daily pilgrimage through mud and human misery. You glance down at your hands. The nails are blackened, the skin cracked and red. The lines etched into your palms seem deeper every year, and you wonder if there is a map to your future hidden among them. A future where you might sleep in a bed without insects or breathe air that does not taste of sewage. Then you shake your head. Such futures are for princes and saints, not for you. You take a deep breath, instantly regretting it, as the stench seems to wrap itself around your lungs. No matter. The day has begun, and you, the town's humble barber surgeon, have little choice but to meet it. You mutter a curse under your breath and prepare to face the never ending darkness that is your reality, knowing, as always, that things can only get worse. You do not wake up hoping to feel clean. The idea is so foreign, so laughably out of reach, that you barely remember what it means. Cleanliness, you know, is a privilege for the rich or for saints, not for those of your kind, the working hands, the rough crowd, those who treat wounds, pull teeth, and wash only when the filth becomes intolerable even to themselves. Still, you perform your ritual of morning hygiene, a sequence of gestures that, if nothing else, allows you to pretend for a brief moment that you are human. You drag yourself toward the corner where a battered wooden bucket squats on the floor. The water inside is the color of weak tea, with floating specks of dirt and something that may have once been a leaf, or perhaps the skin of a dead mouse. You remember the day you filled it, 2 or 3 days ago, braving the morning rush to fetch water from the town's communal well. A feat in itself, Given that the well is little more than a stagnant pit of foulness, surrounded by swearing women, biting children, your hands tremble from the cold. You cup them together and plunge them into the bucket, splashing water onto your face with all the enthusiasm of a man bathing in acid. The water is freezing and slimy, and the shock makes you gasp. You rub your cheeks, your brow, your neck, trying to wipe away at least the top layer of grime. It never works. The dirt is a part of you, ground into your skin, living in the folds and cracks, impossible to truly remove. Sometimes you imagine that if you were to scrub hard enough, your skin itself would peel away, leaving only bone and shame. You run your fingers through your hair, greasy, tangled, crawling with the memory and perhaps the reality of lice. You find a small scab behind your ear and scratch at it absently, wondering how long it has been there. There is no soap, of course. Soap is rare and expensive, and the only time you see it is when a wealthy merchant, fresh from the city, asks you to shave him with his own imported bar. Even then, the bar is used so sparingly, it might as well be a relic. Your beard is wild, uneven, and peppered with crumbs from yesterday's meal. You pick out a lump of something unidentifiable and toss it into the straw. As a barber, you are expected to set an example, to be the face of neatness and grooming. The irony is not lost on you. When you shave your clients, you use a blade that is barely sharper than a rusty spoon. On yourself, you use nothing. You have grown fond of your beard's wildness. It hides the sores on your chin and the thinness of your jaw. You reach for your toothbrush, which is nothing more than a splinter of wood, whittled at one end. You jam it into your mouth and rub it against your teeth. The taste is of old wood and dried blood. You spit a gob of pink saliva onto the floor, watching it mix with the dust. You have one tooth that aches constantly, a dull, thudding pain that reminds you daily of your own mortality. There is nothing to be done. You will wait until it festers, swells, and finally forces you to pull it out with your own hand. Next comes the ritual of checking your body for new wounds. You strip off your shirt, shivering in the cold air. Your skin is a map of old scars, bruises, and insect bites. You scratch at a patch of redness on your belly, half expecting to find another tick embedded there. Your back aches from nights spent on straw, your legs from days spent standing. You run your hands over your ribs and wince. Hunger has become a second skin. There is a mirror in the corner, a disc of polished metal that reflects only the vaguest approximation of your face. You peer into it, squinting, trying to see yourself as others might. The image is warped and dull. Your eyes are sunken, ringed with shadows. There is a line of grime along your jaw, and your hair looks like a nest that has been abandoned by smarter creatures. You force yourself to smile. The effect is ghastly. You look away. Your shirt, once white, is now the color of old cheese, stained yellow and brown with the history of your life. You shake it out, beating a cloud of dust into the air and pull it back over your head. The cloth sticks to your skin, heavy with moisture and regret. You take a moment to tie your belt, a frayed length of rope, and tuck in the ends, more out of habit than necessity. You remember, for a moment, what it was like to see the priests on festival days, their hands clean and nails trimmed, their vestments bright as sunlight. You remember the stories they told of water so pure it healed wounds, of miracles wrought with a single touch. You wonder if such stories were invented simply to torment the poor. Your feet, too, deserve a moment's attention. You pull off your boots and inspect your toes. The nails are yellow, thick as horn, and the skin between them is cracked and bleeding. You dip your feet into the bucket, wincing as the water stings the raw flesh. You think about the rich who bathe in barrels of hot water and scented oils, who never know the misery of cold, dirty feet. You pull your boots back on and stand, teeth clenched. Now comes the final insult. You must make yourself presentable. You wipe your hands on your trousers, leaving streaks of filth behind, and run your fingers through your hair one last time. It makes no difference, but you do it anyway. It is a gesture, a kind of defiance, a way to say to the world, I am still here, I am still human, no matter how much you try to grind me into the dirt. You gather your things, your battered tools and worn satchel, and move toward the door. The air in the room is thick and sour, but you hesitate. Outside, it will be worse. The stench of the street, the noise, the chaos. You breathe deeply, regretting it immediately, and prepare to step out into the world. In this moment, as you stand between filth and more filth, you realize that this is the truest form of cleanliness you will ever know. Not the absence of dirt, but the acceptance of it. You are not clean, and you never will be, but you are ready to begin another day. Breakfast is a word that promises nourishment, comfort, and a pleasant start to the day, but you know better than to expect any such luxuries. In your world, breakfast is not an event. It is a brief, miserable transaction with survival itself, a negotiation between your stomach's hunger and whatever crusts remain from yesterday. Still, you perform the ritual. After all, you have work to do, and it is better to face the misery of the day with something in your gut, even if that something fights to crawl back out again. You rummage through your satchel and find the small linen pouch that holds your precious store of bread. Once upon a time, the bread was soft, the crust yielding to your teeth, the inside sweet with the memory of wheat and sun. Now it is a gray lump, harder than your own knuckles, with a smell that hints of mold and sorrow. You break off a piece, flakes of crust falling to the floor, like the dust of lost hope. The interior is dry and dense, interrupted by a vein of blue-green that, as you tell yourself, probably harmless. Probably. You force yourself to take a bite, teeth straining to crack the crust. You chew and chew, the bread growing in your mouth until it becomes a heavy paste, sticking to your teeth, your tongue, the roof of your mouth. You try not to gag, The taste is sour, a mixture of old flour and the memory of mice. You chew anyway, because you must. You chase each swallow with a sip from your wooden cup. The water is as much an ordeal as the bread. Your cup was carved years ago, the bottom rough and uneven, leaking just enough to keep your hands damp at every meal. The water itself you fetched from the communal barrel 3 days past, and you have tried very hard not to look too closely at what floats in it. Sometimes you find a strand of hair, sometimes a worm or the skin of an onion. Once you found something that you chose not to investigate, deciding that ignorance is the closest thing to cleanliness you will ever know. You raise the cup to your lips, the smell hitting you first. Earthy, metallic, with a hint of the riverbank in spring when everything is rotting at once. You hold your breath and drink. The water is cold, at least, though it leaves an oily film on your tongue and a faint bitterness that lingers long after. You imagine the townsfolk upstream, washing their clothes, their animals, their children, using the same water that now sloshes in your cup. You try not to dwell on this, but the thought returns every time you drink, like a splinter beneath your fingernail. Some days, if you are lucky, there is something extra, a piece of cheese, yellow and sweating in the dawn light, or a slice of dried apple. Today, there is only bread and water. You break off another piece, smaller this time, and consider whether it is worth eating at all. Your stomach growls in protest, and you give in. Hunger is the one master you obey without question. As you eat, you stare at the walls of your room. The plaster is cracked, the wood warped with age and moisture. In the corners, spider webs glisten, full of patient, silent spiders who seem to know more about survival than you ever will. You watch them for a while, envy mixing with disgust. At least spiders are never hungry for long. Your mind drifts as you chew, counting the days since you last ate a meal you might call satisfying. There was a feast in the market square months ago to celebrate a visiting noble. You caught a scrap of roast meat thrown to the crowd, a piece barely large enough to fill a child's hand, but to you, it tasted of riches. You remember it now, the memory making your mouth water, even as you choke down another mouthful of stale bread. A sudden knock at the door startles you, but it is only the neighbor's child begging for crumbs. You ignore him, as you always do. There is no charity among the poor. You feel a pang of guilt, but it is quickly swallowed by hunger. You are too busy surviving to save anyone else. You finish your meal in silence, licking your fingers for the last trace of flavor. You collect the crumbs from your lap and put them back in the pouch. Waste nothing. That is the first lesson you learned. Waste nothing, trust no one, and never expect kindness. In this life, there are no favors, only debts. You rinse your mouth with a final swallow of water, swishing it around your teeth in a futile attempt at cleansing. The ache in your jaw flares up again, sharp and sudden, and you grimace. You run your tongue over the offending tooth, feeling the swollen gum, the edge of rot. You know it will have to come out soon, but you push the thought away. Not today. Outside, the first rays of sunlight slip through the cracks in your door, painting the room with stripes of gold and filth. The light does nothing to warm you, but it is a signal the town is waking. You can hear the lowing of cattle, the distant clatter of buckets, the rising chorus of voices cursing the dawn. You finish your meal and stand, knees creaking, stomach uncertain. Breakfast is done, such as it was. You gather your things, tools, satchel, what little hope remains, and prepare to step into the street. Another day awaits, filled with the same small miseries, the same endless hunger. You take a deep breath, tasting bread and regret, and move toward the door. With any luck, lunch will be better, but you know better than to believe in luck. You step outside, and the day truly begins. There is a moment, just before you open the door, when you allow yourself to hope that perhaps the street outside will not be so bad this morning. Maybe the rain washed away the filth. Maybe the city guard has rounded up the worst of the beggars and thieves. Maybe, just maybe, today will be different. You open the door, and all such hope dies a quick and painless death. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. It rolls over you like a wave, thick and undeniable, a heady blend of rotting vegetables, animal dung, human waste, and the sour tang of despair. Every breath you take is a reminder of where you live, not in a city of saints and scholars, but in a festering pit of suffering where the best you can hope for is to make it from one day to the next, with your shoes still on your feet and your purse still on your belt. The street itself is a miracle of human neglect. The cobblestones, where they exist at all, are slick with a paste of mud and manure, polished to a dangerous sheen by the passage of countless boots and hooves. More often, though, your boots squelch through a lumpy mire, half mud, half the remains of last night's chamber pots. Somewhere nearby, a pig roots happily in a pile of garbage, snuffling up the remnants of a cabbage leaf with the kind of enthusiasm you wish you could muster for your own breakfast. You pick your way carefully down the street, eyes on the ground, dodging puddles of unknown provenance and sidestepping the more obvious hazards. A pile of horse dung already flattened by the wheels of a passing cart, the broken shell of a rotten egg, a pool of something green that you suspect is not entirely natural. Every so often, you glance up, just in time to avoid walking headlong into a low hanging sign or a suspiciously stained washing line. Above you, the sky is a grim, washed out gray, heavy with the threat of more rain. The buildings on either side of the street lean drunkenly toward one another, as if conspiring in secret. Their wooden beams are slick with mildew, and the shutters hang askew. In the upper windows, faces appear and disappear, children, mostly, their eyes wide and curious, mouths already practicing the curses they will one day shout from these very windows. A cluster of market vendors shouts at you from up ahead, their voices rising above the din. Fresh fish, one cries, though the smell tells a different story. Bread, still warm, Another insists, waving a loaf so black with mold that it could serve as a weapon. You do not stop. You know better than to trust anything described as fresh in this place. Besides, you have no coin to spare. You are not alone on the street, of course. The early risers are already out, haggard men and women hauling carts, children running wild, the occasional stray dog limping from one pile of refuse to the next. A group of boys chases a cat, laughing as it darts between their legs. An old woman, bent double under the weight of her own rags, mutters curses at anyone who comes too close. Somewhere, someone is already fighting, angry voices raised in a language that is equal parts threat and prayer. And then there is the city guard. You hear them before you see them. The clank of armor, the jingle of coins, the deep, bored voices of men who have spent too many years patrolling streets just like this one. The guards travel in twos or threes, their boots surprisingly clean, their faces marked by the smug assurance of those who wield power. Their eyes slide over the crowd, always searching for someone to harass, someone to extort, someone to remind who truly rules here. You keep your head down as you pass them, heart pounding, sweat prickling at the back of your neck. You know how easily a bad morning can become a worse day, how quickly a careless glance, a muttered word, or the mere misfortune of being in the wrong place can attract their attention. A friend of yours, another barber, once joked that the city guard is the only thing in town more dangerous than a dull razor. The joke was funny until he disappeared. The guards stop a boy up ahead, no older than 10, barefoot and filthy, clutching a handful of wilted greens. One of the guards grabs him by the collar, shaking him until the greens fall to the ground. The other leans in, whispering something you cannot hear. The boy nods, tears already streaking his cheeks. The guards laugh, take a coin from the boy's pocket, and shove him into the mud. Nobody interferes. Why would they? In this place, mercy is an expensive habit, and you have no coin to spend. You step carefully around the boy who does not look up. You keep walking, feeling the guard's eyes follow you for a moment too long. You want to spit, to curse them for what they are, but you do not. You keep your mouth shut, just as you have learned to do. Your journey to your shop takes you past the usual landmarks. The tannery, with its open vats of reeking hides. The butcher, already hanging fresh carcasses from rusty hooks. The well, where women jostle and shout, slopping water into buckets and cursing anyone who splashes them. Every place has its own scent, its own particular brand of misery. As you walk, you remember stories you heard as a child, stories of clean cities, where the streets are swept each morning, where fountains run with clear water, where the only thing you have to fear is your own shadow. You wonder if such places exist, or if they are just another kind of fairy tale invented to keep children from despair. Your boots are soaked through by the time you reach your shop, your feet numb, and your mood soured. The sign above your door swings drunkenly in the breeze, the paint flaking, the letters barely legible. You push open the door and step inside, leaving the filth and fear of the street behind you, though you know deep down that you will carry them with you all day, no matter how hard you try to wash them away. You pause for a moment, listening to the sounds of the street, the cries of vendors, the shouts of the guard, the distant wail of a child who has already learned that in this world, the only thing more reliable than pain is the indifference of those who witness it. You shut the door and take a shaky breath. The city, in all its filth and cruelty, waits for you outside, but for now, you are safe, if only for a moment. The inside of your shop greets you with a chill that feels almost alive. In the gloom, it is easy to pretend, for a moment, that the chaos and filth outside are merely a bad dream. But the illusion never lasts. Your shop is a single narrow room, its walls stained with years of blood, grease, sweat, and hope ground down into a greasy patina that never comes clean. The smell is a living thing, a thick mixture of stale sweat, old iron, boiled herbs, festering wounds, and the sweet, unmistakable odor of human fear. Your shop is not much to look at, but it is yours. A sagging wooden bench lines one wall, its surface worn smooth by generations of anxious backsides. Against the opposite wall, a low table serves as both your workbench and display, although display is too grand a word for the clutter of cracked cups, dried herbs, bottles filled with mysterious fluids, and your battered set of tools. Everything here is touched by age and desperation. In one corner stands your proudest possession, a brass basin for catching blood. Its shine, once bright, is now muted by stains and time, but you polish it with a cloth whenever you remember, hoping it lends your shop a thin veneer of respectability. You take a deep breath, instantly regretting it, as the stench seems to crawl down your throat. Some of it is familiar, almost comforting by now. The sour tang of old sweat, the metallic note of dried blood, the oily residue of unwashed hair. But beneath it all, there is the rotten, animal odor of wounds left too long unattended. It is the smell of things going bad. You start your morning ritual. First, you open the shutters to let in what little light can penetrate the filthy window. You sweep a half-hearted arc with your broom, sending a cloud of dust and hair swirling into the air. There are always more hairs, gray, black, red, some long, some curly, all tangled together in an intimate, communal filth. You kick aside a crust of old bread, something that might have been a mouse once, and several pieces of broken pottery. Your workspace is never clean, but you try to keep it just shy of catastrophic. Next, you take stock of your tools. A set of shears with one blade slightly bent, a collection of razors in various states of rust and sharpness, a handful of fleams and lancets for bloodletting, their handles sticky with residue, forceps for pulling, teeth, their tips darkened with old blood. There is also your saw, small, vicious, stained with things you prefer not to remember. You lay them out, pretending, as always, that this is the arsenal of a professional, not a scavenger. You run a rag over each tool, scraping away the worst of the filth. There is no proper method for sterilizing instruments. The best you can do is wipe, rinse, and, on rare occasions, heat the blade in a candle flame. You once heard a traveling physician talk about boiling tools to cleanse them of bad humors. The idea seemed as exotic and impossible as flying. You do what you can, which is not much. Already you hear them outside, the soft shuffling of feet, the coughs and murmurs of your first customers. You glance through the grimy window and see them, an assortment of townsfolk, waiting in a loose line that stretches along the wall, clutching hats, scarves, or simply the edges of their own coats. Their faces are marked by the city, pockmarked, weather beaten, pale with hunger or ruddy with fever. They look at your door with a kind of desperate hope, as if your skills might save them from something worse. You open the door and gesture for the first client to enter. A big man, broad shouldered, but stooped from years of labor, squeezes into your shop. He smells of manure and hay. His beard is a tangled forest, his skin raw and flaky around the edges. He sits on the bench and looks at you expectantly. Beard or blood, you ask, as always. There is a kind of gallows humor in the question, a nod to the peculiar blend of services you provide. In this city, the line between barber and healer is thin, and you walk it every day. The man grunts, both. You nod. This is common. People come for a shave or a haircut, but always, lurking behind the request, is some ailment, some wound that festers just out of sight. You fill your basin with water from a chipped jug, swirl it around to dislodge whatever might be living at the bottom, and set to work. As you trim his beard with your dull shears, you try to make conversation, something about the weather, the price of bread, the rumor of plague in the next town. Your client answers in monosyllables, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the wall. When you finish, you fetch your razor, dip it in the basin, and begin to scrape away at the stubble, careful not to cut too deep. Blood is a part of the process, but too much, too soon, is bad for business. Behind your client, others shuffle in, a mother with a child on her hip, the boy's face shiny with fever, an old woman cradling her swollen hand, fingers curled and red, a young man, eyes wild, clutching his jaw as if afraid it might fall off. The room fills quickly with bodies and heat, their breaths adding to the humidity and stench. You move from one to the next, switching roles as needed. Barber, surgeon, priest, confessor, executioner, you clean wounds with vinegar and spit. You stitch flesh with thread so thick it leaves scars. You pull teeth with a twist and a prayer, always expecting the scream that follows. Sometimes you give advice, but mostly you give relief, temporary, fleeting, but enough to get them through the day. In the lull between clients, you scan your shelves for anything useful, a bottle of cheap wine to dull the pain, a scrap of linen for bandages, a pinch of dried herb that might, If you are lucky, ward off the worst of the fever. There is never enough. You make do, always making do. Your hands moving on autopilot while your mind drifts to darker places. Now and then, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the reflection of your brass basin, hair wild, eyes red rimmed, skin pale under the grime. You look every bit as desperate as your clients. You wonder, not for the first time, who will tend to you when your luck finally runs out. By midday, the bench is sticky with sweat and blood, the basin full of hair, scum, and the red swirl of recent cures. The line outside never really ends. There is always someone in need, always another wound to dress, another tooth to pull, another tale of misery to hear. You work until your back aches, your hands cramp, and your eyes burn. You tell yourself, as you do every day, that you are performing a service, that without you, the suffering would be worse. But as you look around your tiny kingdom of pain and desperation, you cannot quite convince yourself that it is true. The day is only half over. The real work has just begun. You gesture for the first real client of the morning, a peasant, broad shouldered but stooped with the sort of chronic defeat only decades of poverty and disappointment can produce. His clothes are thick with mud, straw, and the oily residue of sweat. His hair, if you can call it that, is a tangle of knots, grease, and something else that wriggles and scurries when the sunlight glances across his scalp. He lowers himself onto your bench with the care of a man who knows every joint in his body will protest. His knees crack. He smells of manure, wood smoke, and hopelessness, a blend that is so familiar to you now that you only notice when it is absent. The peasant mutters a greeting you barely catch. You nod, reaching for your bent shears and your comb, whose missing teeth make it a weapon rather than a tool. Short, like last time, you ask, though the answer is always the same. Short as you can, he grunts, eyes fixed on his dirty hands. You begin the process, working your shears through the tangled mass, each snip met with the faint sound of resistance, as if the hair itself is reluctant to let go. Clumps fall to the floor, some crawling with lice, some sticky with dried blood. The peasant sits in silence, flinching only when the blades come too close to a sore spot. The silence stretches. You fill it with the sort of conversation everyone expects from a barber, even here. Cold morning, isn't it? You say, as if the weather is anything other than relentless misery. The peasant grunts in agreement, and you sense this is the most he has spoken to anyone all week. The conversation drags on, stilted and pointless. You ask about the harvest, bad as always. The landlord raised the taxes, as always. The baker's daughter is still sick, as always. You find your questions growing more automatic with each day, each season. The answers change only in their details, never in their substance. Hunger, sickness, cold, and fear. You wonder sometimes why you keep asking. Your comb snags on a swollen bump at the base of his skull. The man winces, but does not complain. You part the hair gently to examine the wound, a patch of scalp red and wet, crusted with pus, crawling with lice and what might be fly eggs. You suppress a shudder. You want me to look at that? You ask, as if you have the luxury to refuse. He shrugs, which you take for agreement. You set aside the shears and prod the wound with your finger, careful but not gentle. Hurts? You ask. Only when I sleep, he says, his tone flat. You reach for your jar of vinegar, pouring a splash onto a rag that was, until recently, part of a shirt. The vinegar stings his skin, and his lips twist into a grimace. You pat the wound dry, watching as new blood seeps out. Keep it clean, you say, handing him the rag, though you both know he will not. There is no clean in his world, only less dirty. You pluck a louse from the wound and flick it to the floor where it joins its brothers in the ever growing army. You return to cutting, each snip an exercise in endurance. You find another sore, this one on his temple, dark and glistening. Had this long, you ask, not really caring, but filling the air with words. Since the frost, he replies, itches at night. You nod, apply more vinegar, and wonder how many more sores lie hidden under the layers of filth and resignation. Soon, you have shaped what remains of his hair into something that almost resembles a style. The peasant does not thank you. He simply stands, wipes the loose hairs from his shoulders, and fumbles for a coin in his pocket. The coin, when he finally produces it, is so worn you can barely make out the king's face. You accept it anyway, slipping it into your apron, knowing it may be the only payment you see today. Before he leaves, he pauses. You hear about the fever? He asks, his voice low. Down by the docks, 3 dead last night. More to come, I reckon. You nod, pretending to listen, though you have heard it all before. There is always a fever somewhere, always death just around the corner. The peasant shuffles out, leaving a trail of hair, lice, and misery in his wake. You sweep the debris into a pile using your foot when the broom fails. The pile is already impressive, and the day has barely begun. Outside, you hear the next client cough. It is a wet, rattling sound, full of promise and infection. You sigh, wash your hands in the filthy water, and call them in. The rest of the morning passes in a haze of hair, sores, and complaints. Each client is a variation on the same theme: dirt, despair, and desperation. You patch wounds, lance boils, comb out lice, and listen to stories of loss and hunger. Occasionally you laugh, because if you did not, you would scream. You notice a small cut on your thumb, oozing a bead of blood. You lick it away, not bothering to clean it further. If infection comes, it comes. You are no stranger to pain. By midday, your bench is sticky with sweat and whatever else leaks from your clients' bodies. Your tools are clogged with hair and pus. Your hands ache from constant motion. Still, the line outside grows. There is never a shortage of misery in this town. You take a moment to catch your breath, looking out the window at the street. The world outside is no cleaner, no safer. You are reminded once again that your shop is less a place of healing and more a stopgap, a pause in the inevitable march toward death. You return to your work. There are more sores to clean, more hair to cut, more stories to half listen to. In this world, small comforts are the best you can offer. You sweep the floor again, noting that the pile of hair is now moving under its own power. You crush it with your boot, muttering a curse. The next client is already at the door, and you force a smile, ready to begin the cycle anew. In the end, you realize there is no cure for this place, only survival, one filthy haircut at a time. There is a shift in the room the moment the merchant arrives. Unlike the peasants and laborers, he sweeps in with the confidence of someone who expects the world to bend for him. His clothes are too fine for your neighborhood, a doublet of once bright blue, stained at the cuffs with ink and grease, but still richer than anything you have ever owned. He carries the faint scent of exotic spices, layered over the city's ever present filth, a man who tries and fails to rise above the muck. His beard is trimmed but unruly, as if he has given up the struggle of keeping up appearances. He looks around your shop with thinly veiled disdain. You see the way he wrinkles his nose at the stink, the way his eyes flicker to your battered tools, as though he is considering whether they might carry some disease that has never before touched his privileged skin. For a moment, you almost wish he would leave, but you need the coin. You always need the coin. He settles onto your bench with a dramatic sigh, as if simply being in this room is an act of charity. A close shave, he commands, and mind you do not nick me. I have business at the guild today. He produces a small cloth pouch and sets it beside him, a clear signal that he expects extra attention and, perhaps, some semblance of comfort. You nod, feigning the deference he expects. You reach for your razor, a blade that has seen better days, its edge dulled by endless heads and faces, its handle smoothed by desperate, sweating hands. You strop it against a length of old leather, pretending this will make a difference. The merchant watches every movement, his eyes sharp, suspicious. You wonder if he even notices how many times you've cut yourself on this very blade. You prepare a bowl of water, pouring from your jug with exaggerated care, hoping he will not notice how murky it is. You dip a rag into the water, wring it out, and press it to his jaw. He flinches at the cold, frowning as if you have committed an insult. You ignore his discomfort and begin to lather his face with a piece of soap, real soap, which he has brought himself, perfumed and foreign. The sweet scent is so out of place in your shop that it makes you dizzy. You take a deep breath and put the blade to his throat. There is always a moment, every time you shave a man, when you realize how easy it would be to press a little harder and change the course of both your lives forever. The merchant's pulse jumps beneath your fingers, his skin pale and soft. You smile, just a little, knowing that for these few minutes he is utterly at your mercy. You begin to shave, careful and slow, dragging the blade along his jaw with practiced precision. The blade catches on a patch of bristle, and you adjust your angle, careful not to draw blood. The merchant shifts, his hands clutching the edge of the bench. He tries to make conversation, as if talking might distract you from the dangerous work. I hear there is trouble in the market, he says, his voice thin. The guild wants higher fees, and the bakers are threatening to strike. He glances at you in the mirror, as if expecting your opinion. You grunt noncommittally, your attention fixed on the razor. You have learned over the years to say little around men like this. They are not looking for answers, only echoes. He goes on, complaining about taxes, about thieves, about the price of pepper. You respond with polite murmurs, offering nothing of yourself. Your mind drifts to other things: the sore on your thumb, the pile of unwashed linen, the next mouth to feed. All the while, the blade slides over his skin, scraping away the stubble, leaving a trail of red where you nicked him. Just a little. He hisses, but you press a clean cloth to the cut, murmuring apologies. The air is dry this time of year, you say, as if that explains everything. You finish the shave, wiping his face with the least dirty corner of your towel. He inspects your work in the polished metal disc you call a mirror, frowning at a missed patch on his chin. You quickly tidy it up, careful not to provoke further complaints. He stands and dusts himself off as though he has survived some ordeal. He reaches for the pouch, opens it, and drops a pair of coins onto your palm. Real silver, more than you make in a week of peasants and beggars. See that you keep your shop cleaner, he says, not unkindly, as if this is advice rather than an insult. And sharpen your blades. He turns to go, pausing at the door. If I return with an infection, I shall have words with the guild. You bow your head, biting back a retort. Of course, sir, you say, forcing your lips into something like a smile. He leaves, and you are alone again with your tools, your blood-stained towel, and the fading scent of foreign soap. You pocket the coins, feeling their weight as both blessing and curse. With every shave, you risk disease, violence, or the wrath of someone with more power than you. The merchant will be back, of course. There are only so many barbers, and even fewer with the patience to tolerate men like him. You take a moment to wash your razor in the cold, dirty water, watching the red swirl away. You check the blade for nicks, sighing when you find another imperfection. You will have to sharpen it again tonight, though it will never be as keen as the blades you once dreamed of owning. The morning moves on. The next client is already waiting, a pale boy with a swollen cheek, eyes bright with fever. You call him in, the brief respite of silver coins already fading from your mind. As you reach for your tools, you wonder if the merchant noticed the tremor in your hands, the hesitation in your eyes. You wonder sometimes how many men have sat in this chair thinking themselves above you, never realizing how thin the line between customer and victim truly is. You wonder, too, if you will ever be brave or foolish enough to cross it. But not today. Today, you are a barber, not a judge. You sharpen your blade as best you can and get back to work. It is only a matter of time before someone requests what passes for true medicine in your world. Today, the plea comes from a gaunt, nervous woman whose face is all sharp edges and haunted eyes. She sits at the very edge of your bench, wringing her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. You know her type. A widow, perhaps, or simply someone with too many mouths to feed and too few ways to do it. Her skin is tinged with a sickly yellow, and her voice trembles as she makes her request. I need the blood drawn out, sir. The fever has not left me, and I am told it must be the bad humors. You nod, already reaching for the tools of your grisly trade. There is an odd comfort in this routine, a strange predictability to the ritual of bloodletting. In a world of constant uncertainty, at least this process never changes, at least not until the blood runs dry. You fetch your oldest, most reliable knife, a fleam, its blade dark with stains that will never come out, no matter how much you scrape or polish. You eye the patient's arm, already pale and thin, the veins just visible beneath the skin. Which arm, then? You ask. She offers the left, pushing up her sleeve with resigned obedience. You take a strip of linen, frayed at the edges, stiff with dried fluids, and tie it tightly above her elbow. The skin bulges, the veins stand out a little more. You rub her arm with a rag, more a gesture of comfort than cleanliness. There is nothing antiseptic about this place. You work in the full knowledge that your hands, your knife, the very air, everything conspires against the hope of healing. You hold the fleam over the vein, your thumb finding the pulse, and for a moment you wonder, as you always do, if this time it will go wrong. You have seen arms swell with infection, have seen blood stop flowing or refuse to clot. You have seen, on rare and terrible days, a client bleed out on your bench while you try not to panic, pretending it is all under control. Today, you are lucky. The skin gives with a soft resistance, and dark blood wells up, first in a slow ooze, then a steady stream. The woman watches with glazed eyes as you collect her blood in your brass basin. The sound is faintly musical, a patter like rain on a roof. You are careful not to take too much. It is a matter of professional pride. Too little, and the ritual loses its magic. Too much, and the patient may never walk out again. In the middle ground is a kind of compromise, a little weakness, a little dizziness, but not death. Do you feel lighter? You ask her, the customary joke. Your tone is dry, your eyes fixed on the slow swirl of red in the basin. She smiles wanly, the corners of her mouth twitching. Not yet, but I suppose I will, she says, her voice faint. Bloodletting is the one constant in your practice. The sick come with their headaches, their fevers, their nightmares, and all of them, in the end, request the same thing: relief through emptiness. The theory is simple enough. Illness is caused by excess, by imbalance, by the presence of something inside that ought not to be there. The solution is to let it out, to drain the sickness with the blood. You know, in your heart, that it is nonsense. You have seen enough to suspect that bloodletting does more harm than good. But what choice do you have? You are not a scholar. You are not a priest. You are a barber, and this is what people expect of you. You remove the phlegm, wiping it on a rag, and press your thumb to the wound. The blood seeps around your skin, sticky and hot. You wrap the arm in linen, tying it tight. The woman slumps a little, her eyelids fluttering. You pour her a cup of water, brackish and warm, and hold it to her lips. She drinks, spilling half of it down her front, but she manages a nod of gratitude. The room is quiet now, save for the buzzing of flies and the distant noise from the street. You tip the basin, emptying the blood into a clay pot that sits, half full, beneath your table. Later, you will dispose of it in the gutter, adding it to the stew of waste that flows through the city. For now, it is enough to cover it, to keep the flies at bay. The woman sits in silence, recovering. You offer her a crust of bread, which she refuses. You do not press the issue. Hunger is as common as fever here, and neither has a real cure. When she is strong enough to stand, you help her to her feet. She leaves a single copper coin on the bench, more than you expected. You nod, pocketing it, and wish her well, though you doubt you will see her again. As you clean your tools, you think of the hundreds, no, thousands, of times you have performed the same act. Each time, you wonder if it makes any difference at all. Each time, you convince yourself it does, because to believe otherwise is unbearable. You wipe the blade, rinse the linen in water already red with other people's pain, and set everything in its proper place. The next patient is already at your door, a boy with a bandaged head, his mother clutching his arm. You beckon them in, and the day moves on. One wound, one vein, one futile hope at a time. Every now and then, you remember the stories told by learned men of new methods, new medicines, miracles that can heal with powders and potions instead of knives. You wonder if such things exist, or if they are only fairy tales spun by the witch to torment the poor. In your world, healing is a slow surrender, blood, sweat, pain, and, if the gods are kind, a little survival. By midday, your shop is heavy with the iron scent of blood. Your basin overflows. Your rags are stiff with dried stains. The line outside has not shrunk. If anything, it grows longer, more desperate, as the rumors of fever and plague filter through the city. You carry on because you must. There are always more veins to cut, more pain to release, more promises to keep. When you finally step back, stretch your aching fingers, and glance out the door, you see only the same thing you saw at dawn, a world hungry for relief, even if that relief is only an illusion. In your heart, you know this ritual is a lie, but it is a lie that everyone shares, and in this world, Sometimes lies are the only medicine left. You are not sure which is worse, the constant parade of festering wounds or the steady stream of rotten mouths. Today it is a young man, not more than 20, but already his teeth are in a state you would expect from an old beggar: blackened stubs, swollen gums, breath that could knock a crow off its perch. He enters with the gait of someone who has not slept in days, clutching his cheek, eyes glassy with pain. He sits, or rather collapses, on your bench, jaw clenched tight. His hands shake on his knees. You recognize the symptoms immediately: the throbbing agony of an abscessed tooth, the kind of pain that erases language, dignity, even fear. It is a pain so total it can make a man beg for the very thing he dreads: removal. You nod wordlessly and begin your grim preparations. From a chipped bowl, you take out your forceps, iron, rusted at the joint, but still strong enough for the work. Beside them, you lay your chisel and mallet, the implements of last resort. There is no real anesthesia in your world. Sometimes a client arrives already drunk, or you offer a swig of sour wine if there is any left. But more often, the only comfort is a piece of wood, rounded and smooth, to be clenched between the victim's teeth. Bite down on this, you instruct, pressing the wood into his hand. He hesitates, then obeys, stuffing it into his mouth and biting so hard his jaw muscles ripple. You see the panic in his eyes, the knowledge of what is coming. You try to keep your face calm, businesslike. This is not the time for pity. You lean close and ask out of habit, "Which tooth?" The answer is obvious: a lower molar, swollen and purple, ready to burst. You prod it with your finger, and the man nearly bucks off the bench. His muffled yelp is cut short by the wood. You wedge your knees against his shoulders and grip his head tight. It is not elegant. You are not a surgeon, just a barber, and this is how it is done in your part of the world. You take up the forceps and work them around the tooth, twisting, searching for purchase. The young man's eyes bulge, his breath coming in short, sharp snorts through his nose. The tooth does not want to leave. It has dug its roots deep, a final act of defiance. You brace yourself and twist harder, feeling the brittle crackle of enamel. The man's fists drum against his knees, sweat pouring from his brow. A high, keening sound escapes him, a noise you have heard so often it no longer raises the hairs on your neck. At last, the tooth gives. With a sickening crunch, it comes free, trailing threads of bloody pus. You drop it in the basin with a clink and set the forceps aside. The young man spits out the wood, blood and saliva running down his chin, and howls. You press a rag to his mouth, pinning him back with your free hand. He sobs, shuddering, as the pain of removal competes with the relief of absence. You work quickly now, packing the wound with a scrap of linen soaked in vinegar. The taste makes him retch, but you hold him firm. Infection is always a risk. You hope the vinegar will be enough, but you know from experience that some wounds never heal. If the rot is in his blood, there is nothing more you can do. For a moment, you consider offering a sip of wine, but there is none left. Instead, you wipe his face clean as you can and mutter words meant to comfort. It will hurt for a while, but the worst is over. It is a lie, but one that all patients want to hear. The young man slumps, exhausted, sweat and tears mingling on his filthy shirt. He looks up at you with something like gratitude, or is it just exhaustion? You cannot tell. He fumbles for a coin and finding none, mutters an apology. You wave it away. Payment is a formality, and sometimes you cannot bear to add shame to suffering. You sweep the bloodied rag into a pile, toss the tooth onto a growing collection in a jar at the back of your shop, and gesture for him to leave. Outside, the sounds of the street continue, indifferent to his agony. He staggers away, one hand pressed to his jaw, the other wiping his eyes. You take a moment to breathe, stretching your fingers. They ache from the effort. You wash your tools in the basin, the water pink with blood. It does not matter how carefully you clean them. They are never truly clean. You scrape off a patch of rust from the forceps and set them aside for the next victim. Tooth extraction is a ritual of your trade, part brutality, part mercy. You have seen grown men faint, children vomit, old women pray. You have felt teeth break in your hands, roots splinter, gums tear. You have lost count of the times an infection has returned, worse than before. Each time you tell yourself you are helping, but you know how thin the line is between cure and curse. The rest of the day brings more mouths, more pain. Sometimes you pull teeth that are only slightly rotten at the insistence of someone terrified of future agony. Other times, you can do nothing but offer vinegar and hope. Every so often, you hear the distant, hollow sound of someone screaming, a sound that echoes through the alleys long after the deed is done. There are nights when you dream of teeth, rows and rows of them, broken, bloody, impossible to pull. In those dreams, you are always reaching, always straining, always failing to save anyone at all. When you wake, it is to the real sound of someone pounding at your door, clutching their jaw, eyes wide with desperation, and you rise again and again because pain never sleeps, and neither, it seems, do you. There are moments in your day when the bloody bustle pauses, when the flow of clients slows to a trickle, and you can finally turn your attention to another vital service, making medicines. In another world, perhaps, this would be an act of careful science, a gentle dance of precision and purity. Here, it is more like guesswork in the mud, conducted with dirty hands and a nose already numb to all but the most violent of odors. You begin by gathering your stores. On a shelf above your bench, bundles of herbs hang upside down, turning crisp and brown in the drafty air. A handful of dried sage, a sprig of yarrow, a knot of wild garlic, and, if you are lucky, a thumb-sized root of something you hope is valerian and not hemlock. There are jars, too, full of dried berries and strange wrinkled roots, their contents more hopeful than potent. You select a few pinches from each, dropping them into a battered clay mortar whose surface is glazed with old residue. The tools of your alchemy are humble: a wooden pestle, a chipped bowl, a spoon whose handle was snapped and mended with twine. You have no scales or weights, only a vague sense of enough that comes from years of trial, error, and sometimes disaster. You crush the herbs together, the pestle rasping against the sides of the mortar. Dust and fragments swirl up into the air, making you sneeze. You wipe your nose on your sleeve and continue. Water is needed, so you fetch it from your basin. Never clean, never clear, but it will have to do. You pour it into a blackened pot, set it over a guttering candle, and wait as the concoction begins to bubble and spit. The smell rises almost immediately, sharp, green, a little sour, and underneath it all, the unmistakable stench of something gone bad. You stir the brew with your spoon, watching as the leaves darken and the surface films over with oily scum. For wounds and fevers, you add honey if you have any left. A precious substance, but sometimes a client pays you with a sticky lump of comb, broken and buzzing with the memory of bees. Today, you scrape the bottom of a jar, gathering a few meager drops, and mix them in. The sweetness does little to disguise the taste, but it is better than nothing. Sometimes, for infections, you add a splash of vinegar, hoping it will burn away the sickness. For pain, a pinch of poppy seeds. If you are truly fortunate, which is rare, more often you rely on the bitterness of yarrow and the pungent garlic, praying they do something more than merely offend the patient's senses. You strain the mixture through a piece of cloth, stained and holy, letting the liquid drip into whatever containers you have managed to scavenge: old wine bottles, chipped cups, even a hollowed out gourd. Some of the dregs stick to the fabric, clinging like regrets. You scrape them out with your finger and add them back to the pot. Waste not, want not. Your shop is soon filled with the smell of boiling herbs, sour and heady, mixed with the ever present backdrop of blood, sweat, and rot. You wonder sometimes how anyone expects to get better in a place like this. But people come as all the same, lining up for your brews and salves, willing to swallow anything if it holds the promise of relief. As you prepare a thick, greenish paste for wounds, you recall the stories you heard as a child of wise women and cunning men who could heal with a glance or a whispered word. Your own practice is far less glamorous. You slather the paste onto filthy rags, slap it over suppurating sores, and bind it tight. There is no magic here, only the faint hope that the wound will fester less quickly than before. A mother arrives with a child whose belly is swollen and hot, eyes half closed in fever. You spoon a little of your bitter brew into his mouth, holding his nose until he swallows. He gags and whimpers, and you mumble a blessing that even you do not believe. The mother thanks you, offering a dried turnip in payment. You accept it, knowing you will trade it for something else before it turns to mush. In the lull between customers, You inventory your ingredients, fingers searching through jars and bundles, hoping to find something useful. Supplies run out quickly, and the merchants know to charge dearly for even the worst stock. Sometimes you must make do with weeds pulled from the alley or bark stripped from the trees behind the tannery. Once, in desperation, you tried to brew a salve from mold scraped off your own walls. The result was a disaster, but the memory still makes you smile. The preparation of medicine is as much theater as it is science. You measure, crush, boil, and stir in full view of your clients, putting on a show of confidence and competence. They watch with wide eyes, desperate for any sign that you know what you are doing. You rarely tell them how uncertain you feel, how often your brews fail, how many times you have watched a patient worsen despite your best efforts. Some days, the stench is so overpowering you must step outside, gulping the less poisonous air of the street. But most days, you simply work through it, nose and soul equally numb. The filth becomes a part of you, as essential as your apron or your shears. By the end of the process, your hands are sticky, stained green and brown, and your nails harbor more dirt than any field. You wipe them on your trousers and move on, never truly clean. The tools go back to the shelf, still caked with residue, and the cycle begins again whenever the next desperate soul appears at your door. You sometimes wonder if your medicines help at all, or if you are merely prolonging suffering. But in this world, relief, however fleeting or illusory, is precious. And so you keep at it, boiling, mashing, mixing, dosing, and hoping. You offer what comfort you can, knowing full well that the line between healing and harm is thinner than the skin you bandage every day. And always, in the back of your mind, you remember the smell of decay is not just in your shop. It is everywhere, in everything, and the only true cure has yet to be discovered. It is never long before someone stumbles into your shop bleeding, limping, or clutching a wound that oozes more misery than blood. Sometimes it is a child who has fallen on the cobbles. Other times it is a laborer with a gash from a tool gone wrong, or worse, a fresh slice from a neighbor's knife. But most often, it is just another soul who waited too long to seek help. One more body leaking pus, sweat, and the sweet stench of approaching death. Today, your first wounded client is a man in his 40s, though hardship has carved so many lines into his face that he might be a decade older. He staggers through your door, pressing a filthy rag to his arm. When he pulls it away, you see the wound, a swollen purple gash, the edges hard and angry, the center glistening with yellow pus. There are black streaks radiating from the injury, like the roots of a sickly tree. You recognize the signs: suppuration, infection, the beginnings of rot. You gesture him to the bench and fetch your tools. He winces at the sight of your needle, bent, blunt, blackened by fire and time. You try to reassure him, but there is little comfort in your voice. You have seen wounds like this too many times. Sometimes they heal, more often they do not. First, you must clean the wound. Your method is simple and brutal. You pour vinegar directly into the gash, watching as it bubbles and froths, mixing with the blood and pus. The man bites down on his knuckles, eyes squeezed shut, feet drumming on the floor. You press a dirty rag to his arm and begin to wipe away the worst of the filth. The smell is overpowering. Sharp vinegar, putrid infection, old sweat. Your stomach tightens, but you keep working. Sometimes, if the wound is especially deep, you sprinkle sawdust over it. The sawdust soaks up the worst of the pus and blood, forming a thick, dirty crust. You pack the wound tight, hoping it will stop the bleeding and slow the spread of corruption. The theory is sound. Keep the wound dry, keep it from festering. But you know the truth. If the infection is in the blood, all the sawdust and vinegar in the world will not save him. The man groans as you sew the wound closed, your hands moving with a practiced, weary precision. Each stitch is a tug of war with skin that wants only to split wider. The thread is coarse, meant for mending shoes or sacks, but it holds most of the time. You mutter a few words of comfort, promising that the pain will fade. It rarely does. When the stitching is done, you slather the wound with a thick paste of herbs and honey, then bind it with whatever strips of linen you can spare. The bandages are never truly clean, but you reassure yourself that the honey might keep out some of the rot. You tie the knot tight, cutting off the blood flow for a moment just to watch the skin pale. Then you loosen it, watching color creep back in, telling yourself it is a good sign. The man thanks you in a hoarse whisper, but you see the doubt in his eyes. He has seen enough death to know what comes next. You hand him a tiny bundle of herbs and tell him to chew them if the pain gets worse. You do not say what you are really thinking, that he should put his affairs in order and pray to any gods still listening. After he leaves, you burn the worst of the rags, hoping the smoke will drive away both the smell and the spirits of the unlucky. The fire hisses, the air fills with the stink of charred blood. You wash your hands in the bucket, watching the water turn cloudy and red. Your tools you pass quickly through the candle flame, a token gesture toward cleanliness. More clients arrive, limping, weeping, trailing blood in their wake. A child with a split scalp from a thrown stone. An old woman with an ulcer on her leg, skin eaten away until bone peeks through the wound. You treat them all, your hands moving from one disaster to the next, barely pausing to breathe. In your memory, the lessons of every wound linger. You remember the man who died screaming, feverish and shivering, his wound crawling with maggots. You remember the boy whose leg turned black, who begged for the pain to stop until his voice failed him. You remember the woman who lasted longest, her wound never healing, her hope leaking out day by day with every drop of pus. You know how fragile the line is between healing and harm. Sometimes the vinegar seems to help. Sometimes the wound dries, scabs, and closes, leaving only a crooked scar. But other times, despite all your efforts, the wound festers, swells, and finally bursts, pouring out the last of the patient's strength. There are moments of grim triumph, of course. The farmer, who returns weeks later, arm scarred but still attached, grinning as if you worked a miracle. The child who stops limping, the woman whose cough finally fades. But for every success, there are three failures, five deaths, 10 ghosts who haunt your dreams. By the end of the day, your shop reeks of vinegar and defeat. The floor is stained, the air is thick, your hands are raw and trembling. You throw open the window, hoping the breeze will carry away the worst of it, but the wind only brings new smells: dung, smoke, sickness, life. You sit for a moment, breathing shallowly, knowing there is no rest. Somewhere, right now, another wound is festering. Another knock will sound at your door, and you will rise to answer it again and again until your own body fails you or the world finally forgets your name. You do not expect thanks. You do not expect miracles. You hope, sometimes, for a little less pain, a little less rot, a little more sleep. But hope is as thin as linen and almost as easy to stain. At some point, between wounds and teeth and the endless parade of coughs, your door creaks open to admit not a patient, but a fellow tradesman. It is Jacob, the barber from 2 streets over, tall, with a crooked back and a voice that always sounds like he is about to laugh at someone else's misfortune. You have known him for years, though you do not know if you like him. You know his hands are as rough and raw as your own, his apron just as stained. He is a mirror, but one with a crueler gleam. He brings with him the smell of cheap wine and strong vinegar, and settles on your bench without waiting to be asked. For a moment, the shop is filled with the heavy silence of two men who know exactly how little separates them from the wounded souls outside. Well, Jacob says, how many have you lost this week? He grins, showing a gap where a tooth should be. Or have you started counting the survivors instead? You shrug, reaching for your cup. I do not keep a tally. It is enough to remember the ones who still pay me. Jacob laughs, and the sound is harsh, scraping against the walls. At least you have the honesty for that. Some of the new men, they talk of curing everything with nettle tea and prayers. Ha! Let them try. Let us see how long their luck lasts. You find yourself both comforted and irritated by his presence. There is a relief in sharing the burden, if only for a little while. Yet, every conversation is a contest, a sly measuring of wounds and wisdom, failures and small victories. He leans in, lowering his voice, eyes darting to the window as if the city watch might be listening. Have you heard about the Italian? They say he can set a broken leg in the time it takes to boil an egg, and none of his patients die. Not a single one. The baker swears he saw a man walk out with a new thumb stitched on. A thumb! What do you make of that? You snort, because you have heard this story before, though last week the miracle worker was from Spain, and before that, from the East. If he is so clever, why is he not rich? Why does he live in a room above the fishmongers and take his payment in turnips? Jacob nods, grinning. That is what I said. Still, the people talk. Some of the women from the market have started going to him instead of us. They say he uses clean needles and washes his hands. I said, what a waste of good water. You cannot cure the city with soap. He spits on the floor to emphasize the point. The conversation turns, as it always does, to gossip about the others. Who lost a finger last week? Who had a customer die in their chair? Who is being investigated by the city guard for letting someone's wound fester too long? Every story is darker than the last, each one told with a gleam of envy barely hidden behind a mask of scorn. You swap recipes for poultices, share complaints about the price of vinegar and the rising cost of thread. Jacob boasts of a boil he lanced that let out enough pus to fill a wine bottle. You counter with the tale of a wound that stank so bad you nearly fainted. It is a grim competition, and there is never a winner. Inevitably, the conversation circles back to the so called miracle healers. There was a time, Jacob says, when people respected us. We had the sharpest blades, the best gossip. Now they look to anyone with a foreign accent and a bottle of colored water. Superstition, that is all. Or maybe hope. He spits again, softer this time. You find yourself bristling with something that might be jealousy. You would like, just once, to be seen as more than a last resort. You would like people to whisper your name in the market as a healer, not just a man with a strong arm and a steady stomach. But you know hope is dangerous. Hope leads to disappointment, and disappointment in your line of work can be fatal. Jacob rises, brushing crumbs from his lap. I must go. Old Marta is expecting me to drain her knee again. If I am lucky, she will pay in coin and not in cabbage. He grins, but his eyes are tired. Take care, friend. And if you see that Italian, ask him if he can stitch me a new back. You nod and watch him shuffle out into the street. For a while, the shop feels emptier than before. The silence grows, broken only by the muffled noise of the city and the faint sound of your own breath. Alone, you remember the other conversations, the secret envy you hear in every colleague's voice, the whispered rumors of miracle cures, of new methods and old superstitions. You think of the times you have tried something new, a cleaner bandage, a different herb, only to be disappointed. You wonder if, perhaps, the miracle is simply surviving it all. You prepare for the next client, checking your tools, sweeping the floor, straightening your crooked sign. In the dim light, you catch your own reflection in a metal basin, and for a moment, you almost believe you see someone different, someone more than just a tired, desperate barber. But the image fades quickly. Outside, the gossip and envy swirl on, each story growing taller as the day drags on. You know tomorrow will bring more of the same, more rumors, more failures, more talk of men who can heal without pain or loss. But for now, you are still here. Your tools are sharp enough. Your wits are for the moment unblunted. And somewhere in the city, another wound is festering, waiting for your hands, clumsy, dirty, human hands, to do what they can. The midday bell rings somewhere far off, its dull clang barely audible above the racket of street traders and the distant shouts of city guards. For most, noon marks a turning point in the day, a chance for rest, a bite to eat, the luxury of idle conversation. For you, lunch is a brief armistice in the war against squalor, a fragile pause snatched between screams and suppurations, and as much about stench as sustenance. You wash your hands, such as it is, in the same bucket you have used all morning, swirling your fingers in water that is now tinged red and brown. The rag you reach for is already stiff, but you wipe your hands anyway, pretending the gesture means more than it does. At this hour, the air in your shop is thick and greasy, an oppressive stew of blood, herbs, sweat, vinegar, and the acrid ghost of burnt linen. Somewhere, someone has vomited, either from pain or from the sight of your work, and the puddle has joined the collection of stains on your floor. You do not bother with it now. Hunger is stronger than revulsion. Your lunch is the same as yesterday and the day before, a ritual as familiar as the act of cutting hair or stitching wounds. You pull from your satchel a crust of bread, dark and hard as old bone, and break it with a practiced, forceful snap. There is a thin slice of dried meat, more tendon than flesh, and smelling faintly of something that might once have been cheese. You gnaw at it, using your back teeth, conscious of the ache in your jaw and the persistent sting of your own neglected molar. If there is fruit, it is shriveled and wrinkled, with a sour tang that makes your lips pucker. You eat it anyway. Every crumb is precious. You gather the fragments in your palm, licking your skin to be sure none are wasted. Sometimes, if fortune smiles, you find a chunk of onion or a few beans tucked into your pouch, pressed there by the generosity of a client or a neighbor. Today, there is only a sprig of wilted parsley, which you chew slowly, savoring its bitterness as a reminder that fresh things are rare in this place. There is no table, only your bench. You eat hunched over your knees, boots braced on the sticky floorboards, eyes fixed on the cracks between the planks. A rat, bold, fat, and unbothered, scurries along the far wall, pausing to sniff at a discarded bit of cheese rind. You do not bother to chase it away. In this city, the rats are your equals, sometimes even your betters. They, at least, are well fed. Your clients, if they see you eating, often pretend not to notice. Hunger is a private shame here, something best endured in silence. Still, there are those who, desperate and emboldened by their own misery, will ask for a scrap of bread or a sip from your cup. You never refuse outright, but your charity is measured in crumbs and drops. You have too little to share and nothing to spare. You drink from your cup, stale water, murky and tepid, tasting of tin and yesterday's sweat. You swish it around your mouth, hoping to dislodge the last of your meal from between your teeth, then swallow, grimacing at the aftertaste. In better times, you might have saved a crust for supper, but you know better now. Eat when you can, while the food is before you. The day is long and hunger is patient. Lunch is not a feast. It is not even a meal, not really. It is a moment, a stolen handful of calories, and a chance to sit, to breathe, to be something other than a servant of pain. Sometimes, as you chew, you let your thoughts wander. You imagine rich men dining in the guild hall, their tables groaning under roasts and pies, their cups brimming with wine. You imagine yourself there, clean and smiling, the aches in your joints replaced by laughter. It is a fantasy, but it makes the crust taste a little sweeter. Just as you allow yourself this brief indulgence, the sounds of the city intrude again. A fight breaks out in the street. Sharp voices, a crash of crockery, the whimper of a dog caught underfoot. You look up, watching shadows flicker across your window, and listen for the telltale tramp of the city guard. There is always the threat of trouble, of a brawl spilling through your door, of a guard demanding payment for protection, of a thief with a knife, and nothing left to lose. Your lunch ends not with satisfaction, but with necessity. The food is gone, your hunger merely dulled, and the business of survival resumes. You sweep the crumbs from your lap, tucking a few into your pouch for later. You stretch, feeling the familiar twinge in your lower back, and gather your tools. The afternoon will be busier. Wounds do not wait for full bellies, and misery is never on a schedule. Before you stand, you allow yourself a final, luxurious moment, the brief closing of your eyes, the weight of your head in your hands. It is almost rest, almost peace. You hear the world breathing outside, and for a few heartbeats, you are nothing at all, just flesh and bone and the steady, stubborn rhythm of a man who refuses to stop. Then a new voice at your door, a cough, a plea, a curse, pulls you back. You rise, you wipe your hands. The city swallows you again. Lunch is over. There is a peculiar moment after lunch when your hands are briefly free of hair and blood, when you can almost believe you are in control of your craft. This is when you tend to your tools, the battered collection of shears, razors, forceps, and saws that make up the true backbone of your trade. If you are a healer at all, you are only as good as the iron in your hands, and here, iron is as stubborn as disease. Your workspace is a cluttered mess. The table is pitted and grooved from years of use, stained a permanent brown black with the memory of old wounds and failures. Everything you own carries the unmistakable odor of old sweat and boiled vinegar. Your tools are scattered, some in a chipped wooden box, some on the table, some on the floor where they fell and were forgotten. A few have teeth marks, the evidence of clients driven to desperate biting during your treatments. You begin with the razors, the most delicate of your weapons. Their edges are not keen, at least not anymore. Each blade is nicked and notched, the sharpness worn away by years of scraping skin and hair, and sometimes worse. You fetch your strop, a length of leather that was once the pride of your shop, now as cracked and stiff as your own hands, and run the blade along its surface, back and forth, a slow rhythm that feels like prayer. It does little to restore the edge, but you do it anyway. The ritual is comforting, a lie you tell yourself because you must. Next come the shears, their hinges loose. The blades do not meet cleanly anymore. You tighten the screw as best you can, fingers slipping on the oily metal. You try to sharpen them on a whetstone, a lump of gray rock, chipped and uneven. Sparks fly, and a bitter metallic smell fills the air, mixing with the ever present stink of the shop. You test the shears on a piece of rag, watching them chew rather than cut. You sigh and set them aside, knowing you will make do. You always do. The saw is a tool of last resort, reserved for the most desperate cases. Its teeth are clogged with something you would rather not identify. You scrape them clean with a nail, flicking the residue onto the floor. The blade itself is rusted, no matter how often you oil it. Still, it bites, and sometimes that is enough. You run your thumb along the teeth and wince at a fresh nick, one more wound to add to your collection. You lay out your forceps and lancets, inspecting each one for cracks or bends. Some are bent nearly out of shape, their points twisted by bone or stubborn tooth. You try to straighten them using a stone or your boot heel, but they never return to their original form. A few are hopeless, but you cannot bring yourself to throw them away. Iron is precious, and you never know when you might need a spare, no matter how broken. Sterilization is a word for priests and scholars, not for barbers like you. You make a show of cleaning, dunking your tools into a pot of boiling water when you can spare the firewood, or passing them briefly through a candle flame. More often, you wipe them with a rag soaked in vinegar, squeezing it until the liquid drips onto your fingers and stings the cracks in your skin. It is not enough, you know this. You see the infections, the fevers, the wounds that refuse to heal, but there is no other way. Sometimes, when you are alone, you remember stories told by traveling surgeons, men who claim to boil everything, to change cloth between each patient, to wash their hands in scented spirits. You envy their luxuries, their endless supplies of clean linen and polished steel. Here, you work with what you have, and what you have is never enough. There are always casualties among your tools. This morning, the hinge on your best pair of scissors gave way, leaving one blade loose and useless. You curse, but repair is a luxury. You tie the pieces together with wire, wrap them with cloth, and hope they will last another day. Every so often, you lose a tool entirely, misplaced, stolen, or simply broken beyond repair. You mourn them like old friends. You sweep the debris from your table, hair, dust, blood, fragments of tooth and bone, into a corner where it joins the rest of the day's leavings. The broom is as broken as everything else, its bristles chewed away by rats. Still, you use it, moving the filth in circles, never truly cleaning. By the end of the ritual, your tools are arrayed before you, as sharp and ready as you can make them. Your hands ache, your back is stiff, and your head buzzes from the fumes of vinegar and hot metal. Still, there is a certain satisfaction in the order, however temporary. For a moment, you feel almost proud, a craftsman, not just a butcher. The illusion will not last, but you savor it while you can. Your clients, of course, do not notice the difference. They care only that your blades are quick and your grip is steady. If they notice the stains or the smell, they say nothing. They have their own battles to fight. The afternoon will bring more challenges, more hair to cut, more wounds to open or close, more teeth to extract. Your tools will dull and break anew, and the cycle will repeat as endless and unforgiving as the city outside. You gather your arsenal, tucking them back into their places, ready for whatever comes next. There is no true cleanliness here, only the thin line between filth and disaster. You cross it every day, and every day you wonder how long before the line crosses you. A cough sounds at your door, and the world pulls you back. There is work to be done, and your tools, such as they are ready. The day in your world never truly ends. It just grows darker, heavier, and stranger as the sun slips away behind chimneys and rooftops. Evening brings a different sort of clientele to your door, people who have spent all day avoiding your shop, hoping that whatever ailed them would vanish on its own, only to be left with pain too sharp or sickness too foul to ignore. The light fades, and so do the boundaries between desperation and madness. As dusk drags its bruised colors across the sky, you hear their voices before you see their faces, slurred, plaintive, and hoarse from too much shouting or too little food. The first to arrive is a drunkard, staggering against the frame of your door, face slick with sweat and flecked with vomit. He carries the smell of bad ale and sour wine, his breath hot enough to wilt the herbs hanging in your window. Need the leg looked at, he mumbles, lifting his trouser to show you a calf swollen, shiny, and purple, with the telltale weeping of infection. You try not to flinch at the sight, but your stomach twists anyway. The wound is ugly and old, a festering sore wrapped in a crust of mud and dried blood. He says he cannot feel his toes anymore. You prod the flesh with your finger, and he only giggles. There is no illusion here, no pretense at cure. You clean the wound as best you can, scraping away the rot, pouring vinegar until he hisses and swings at you. He is too slow, his limbs heavy and uncoordinated. You bind the leg, knowing the effort is for your own conscience, not his future. When you are finished, he slumps on your bench and falls asleep, snoring with his mouth wide, head lolling to one side. You let him be. Better for him to dream, if only for a little while. Next come the beggars, moving in clusters, their faces hidden by scarves and hoods, their hands outstretched, always reaching. They are more shadow than flesh, thin and ragged, eyes darting with animal wariness. One asks you to look at her foot, a raw, open wound where a rat bit her in the night. Another wants you to check the sores on his back, which leak a foul smelling pus. You patch them as best you can, using the last of your rags and the dregs of your herbal salve. Payment, when it comes, is in buttons, broken combs, or whispered prayers. You take what you are given. The air in your shop thickens as the evening deepens. Lamps sputter and cough out oily smoke. The darkness outside presses against the windows, and inside, the candlelight paints everyone's faces with ghastly shadows. The line at your door never quite disappears. The desperate always find you. At the end of the line is a woman you barely recognize. So wasted is her frame, her skin stretched thin over jutting bones. She carries a child in her arms, the boy's face pale and pinched, his breath a thin whistle in the silent room. She begs you to help, her words tumbling over one another in panic and hope. You lay the child on your bench, feeling for a pulse, watching his chest rise and fall. He burns with fever, his skin dry and papery. You reach for your concoction, a mixture of honey, vinegar, and crushed herbs, and press it to his lips. He swallows reflexively, but you know it is not enough. His eyes flutter open for a moment, searching your face for something you cannot give. You tell the mother to keep him cool, to give him water, to pray. You do not say the rest. She leaves, clutching her son, eyes empty as the moon. Evening is when the dying come, the ones who waited too long, who could not afford to seek help before now. They come on swollen feet, with hollow eyes and broken bodies, reeking of the grave. You see wounds that gape like mouths, limbs twisted by fever, faces marked with the spots of pestilence. You do what you can: cleanse, bind, comfort, lie. Sometimes that is all you have. The drunkards come back too, lured by the light in your window and the memory of pain that can be numbed, if not cured. One brings a bottle, offers you a swig as payment for pulling a splinter from his palm. You drink, even though the liquid burns, and for a moment you both laugh, the sound echoing strangely in the gloom. Outside, the city settles into its nightly ritual, dogs barking, distant bells tolling, the clatter of wheels, and the mournful song of a flute somewhere far away. Your shop becomes a haven for the lost and the hopeless, if only because there is nowhere else for them to go. You work with your hands and your wits, moving from one body to the next, patching holes and soothing fears. The stench of sickness is overwhelming. Sweat, pus, cheap wine, old meat, and something colder beneath it all, the quiet scent of death waiting its turn. The air is thick with sighs and groans, punctuated by the occasional shout as you set a bone or lance a boil. Some of your patients do not leave when you are done. They linger in the corners, curled up on the floor, drifting in and out of sleep. You let them stay. The city at night is dangerous, and you are too tired to care if they snore or mutter in their dreams. You wash your hands in the dark, feeling the grit beneath your nails, the stickiness that will not wash away. You wonder, as you do every night, how many more bodies you will see before morning, how many more stories you will hear, how many more eyes will search yours for mercy, forgiveness, or a miracle. Evening is not a time of peace. It is simply another chapter in the endless ledger of human misery. You do your best to balance it, even as the entries grow darker and more desperate. The living dead come to you at night, not ghouls, but men and women with nothing left but breath and pain. You give them what you can: a bandage, a cup of water, a lie whispered with just enough kindness to be mistaken for hope. And when at last your lamp gutters and the night deepens, you lean against the wall, eyes half closed, waiting for the city's darkness to bring you rest, or at least a pause. But in this place, rest is a luxury, and the night is never long enough. Night in the city is a beast of a different sort. It slinks through the streets, coiling into every shadow, making your world feel both suffocatingly small and endlessly perilous. After a day of wounds, sickness, and ceaseless desperation, you might wish for stillness, for the peace of deep sleep, but peace is a rare commodity here, especially for those in your trade. For you, night is a time of vigilance, not rest. You have learned to listen for the sounds that signal trouble. The city is never silent. Even after the curfew bell has rung, there are footsteps in the alleys, muffled shouts, the thud of a fist against a door. Sometimes there is laughter, harsh, echoing, edged with threat. But there is another sound, too, one you dread more than any other: the sudden, unnatural silence that falls when someone dies in your shop. It does not happen every night, but it happens often enough. Tonight, it is the old beggar you patched up at dusk. He came in shivering, his breath rattling in his chest, his skin the color of candle wax. You cleaned his sores, gave him a little of your bitterest brew, bandaged his feet, and let him doze in the corner. At some point, as you worked on another patient, the rattling stopped. When you look over, he is still, his eyes open and glassy, staring at the ceiling as if trying to see through it into another world. Your first reaction is not grief or pity, but a cold, crawling fear. Sudden death is a dangerous thing, not for the dead, but for you. You know how quickly the blame can shift, how easily a rumor can grow. You have heard stories of barbers and healers dragged into the street, accused of murder or witchcraft, beaten or worse. The law may turn a blind eye most days, but a corpse can stir even the laziest constable to action, especially if there is a grieving family looking for justice, or at least a target for their pain. You move quickly. There is a quiet, practiced efficiency to your actions now. You close the beggar's eyes, fold his hands, and whisper a prayer you barely remember. With a glance at the window and door, you slip out into the night, pulling the heavy body with you. The city's darkness is thick, swallowing the faint lamplight as you navigate the maze of alleys. You know the places where bodies go missing, where no one will ask questions. A cart left near the tannery, a pile of rubbish behind the butcher's, a stretch of riverbank where the rats are always hungry. You leave the body there, a little lighter in your chest, but heavier in your mind. Back in your shop, you scrub the bench and the floor, dousing everything in vinegar until the stench makes your eyes water. You toss the dead man's rag and bandages onto the fire, watching them curl and blacken. You are careful to remove any trace, to leave nothing behind that could tie you to his last hours. In the morning, if anyone asks, you will shrug and say he left on his own, perhaps to beg at the cathedral gates. This is not the first time, and it will not be the last. Each death leaves a mark, not just in memory, but in the way you move, the way you think. You begin to see every patient as a potential liability, every wound as a ticking clock. The fear of retribution becomes a second shadow, always at your heels. You try to do your best for your clients, but your best is often not enough, and you know it. The city does not care for excuses, only for scapegoats. You have heard of colleagues who were less careful. There was the old woman in the southern quarter whose client died of fever. The mob broke her windows, dragged her into the street, and would have done worse if not for the intervention of a passing priest. Another barber, younger and cockier than you, was blamed for a botched amputation. His shop burned that night, and he disappeared no one knows where. Some nights, after you have cleaned away the blood and washed your hands until your skin cracks, you sit by the door listening for footsteps. Every creak of wood, every whispered conversation in the street sets your heart pounding. You keep a small knife within reach, not because you believe it will save you, but because it is all you have. You rehearse your story in your mind. He left on his own. I did what I could. I am not to blame. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and troubled. You dream of faces, some you know, some you do not, accusing, pleading, fading away. You wake in the dark, breathless, waiting for the knock that means your luck has finally run out. Tonight, though, the city's anger passes you by. The dogs bark at something you cannot see. The night deepens, and you let yourself doze, chin on your chest, arms folded. It is not peace, not really, but it will do. Tomorrow, you know, another desperate soul will find their way to your door, another life balanced on the thin edge of your skill. And always, behind you, the fear of retribution grows, fed by each death, each failure, each lie you tell to keep yourself safe. The city sleeps, but you do not. Not really. For a barber, night is never truly over. As if the endless demands of the sick and the threat of death were not enough, your life as a barber is punctuated by a different kind of visit, a ritual as old and foul as the gutters themselves. You can always feel it coming, an oily tension that settles over the street as the lamps burn low and the honest folk disappear behind their bolted doors. It is the time of evening when only the desperate or the dangerous are abroad. And on this night, as you are scrubbing a bloodstain from your floor, you hear the sound you dread most, a deliberate knock, heavy and measured, a sound that means business and not healing. You know who it is before you open the door. He is not a client, not a friend, not a soul who comes seeking comfort or relief. He is the city overseer, the local strongman with a badge of office, a face like sour milk, and the oily confidence of a man who never does his own dirty work. His cloak is heavy, his boots polished, his hands soft. He brings with him two assistants, broad shouldered men with the vague smell of ale and sweat, their eyes cold and uninterested. They block the doorway as he steps inside, inspecting your humble shop as if appraising livestock. Well, barber, he drawls, his lips curling into something like a smile. You are still open. That is good. We like to see men who are industrious. The city appreciates it. He glances around at your battered bench, your tools drying on the rack, the faint but unmistakable stench of death lingering beneath the vinegar and herbs. Busy day, I take it? Busy week? You nod, saying nothing, wiping your hands on your apron to hide the tremble in your fingers. You know this game. You have played it before. The overseer's visits are always the same: a little small talk, a little thinly veiled threat, and finally, the main event, the collection. He wanders about the shop, running a finger along your table, examining a bloodied rag with distaste. Dangerous work, barber. People get hurt. Sometimes they do not get better. Sometimes they do not get home at all. He lets the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. We would not want the city guard to misunderstand, or for the wrong people to think you are responsible for accidents. His smile widens, showing a mouthful of yellow teeth. But you know that already. He sits, uninvited, on your bench, spreading his cloak so it will not touch the stains. His assistants remain by the door, arms folded, blocking both exit and hope. You know what comes next. He names a sum, higher than last time, always higher, as if your misery is something that should inflate with the price of bread. You could protest, plead poverty, point to the empty coin jar or the pile of worthless buttons and cabbage leaves that pass for payment from your clients. But you have tried that before, and it never ends well. You reach for the little box you keep hidden under your table, the sum of a week's work, maybe more. You count out the coins, the cold metal sticky with sweat and fear. You try not to show the pain of handing them over, but the overseer sees it anyway. He always does. He weighs the coins in his hand, smirks, and slips them into a purse at his belt. There now, he says, standing with a grunt. That was not so hard. The city thanks you for your contribution to public safety. His men laugh, a sound without humor, and shift in the doorway as if daring you to object. We will be back next week, of course. We like to keep things regular, predictable, no surprises. And if the city guard ever asks about your business, well, You remember who keeps your windows unbroken and your bones in one piece. You nod again, biting back anger and shame, and bow your head in false gratitude. There is no use fighting. You have seen what happens to those who refuse to pay. Their shops burned, their tools smashed, sometimes their bodies found in the gutter, cold and empty as a winter morning. As the overseer leaves, he pauses, turning back to look you in the eye. One more thing, barber. If you hear any talk about trouble, plague, poison, unhappy customers, you let us know. The city cannot afford panic, you understand? You promise you will, though you both know it is a promise made only for survival. The door slams behind them, rattling the hinges, and you slump against the wall, your body suddenly hollow. The money you gave away was your lifeline, your rent, your hope for new tools, maybe a better meal. Now it is gone, and you are left with the same old question. How much longer can you keep paying? How much more can you lose before you have nothing left at all? You look around your shop, every shadow suddenly deeper, every noise outside a threat. The city is not your friend. The city is a maw, always hungry, and the men like the overseer are its teeth. You return to your work, your hands a little shakier, your mind more clouded, your hope thinner than ever. Tomorrow you will open your shop as usual. Tomorrow the sick and the dying will come, and you will greet them with tired hands and a forced smile. But tonight you lie awake in the darkness, listening for footsteps, wondering if the price you pay is enough, or if, someday soon, even paying will not be enough to keep the wolves at bay. The city is quieter now, the streets empty, but for the flicker of a lantern in the distance and the shuffle of stray dogs rooting through rubbish. Most honest souls have retreated behind their doors, and the thieves, too, have already chosen their targets for the night. You are alone, or so you hope, counting out your remaining coins by candlelight, trying to decide what corners to cut in the days to come. That is when you hear the knock, a soft, hurried rap, the kind that tries not to be heard at all. Your heart jumps. At this hour, no good news ever comes. You move to the door, feet silent on the floor, and peer through a crack. There is a figure outside, hunched in a heavy cloak, face hidden by the hood. For a moment, you consider pretending you are not there, but you know they will wait. The truly desperate always do. You open the door a crack. What is it? You whisper. The figure slips inside, moving with the nervous energy of someone with secrets to sell or wounds to hide. As soon as the door is closed, they drop the hood. A woman, her eyes wide and frantic, skin pale as milk in the candlelight. You recognize her, though she does not often come this far into your part of town. A maid from one of the merchant houses, clutching a bundle close to her chest. She wastes no time with pleasantries. I need your help, she says, voice barely above a whisper. It is urgent. Please, no one must know. You gesture her to the bench, extinguishing one of the candles so the light does not spill out into the street. She sets her bundle down. It is her hand, wrapped in rags, blood seeping through the cloth. She is shaking, but not just from pain. You know the look. This is not a wound gained honestly. This is something secret, something shameful or dangerous. You examine her hand. The injury is fresh, a deep cut, likely from a knife, though she will not say how it happened. Perhaps she was caught stealing or defending herself, or perhaps it was something even more complicated. You do not ask. The less you know, the safer you are. You work quickly, washing the wound with vinegar and wrapping it in a fresh scrap of linen. She grits her teeth but does not cry out. She does not look you in the eye. The silence between you is heavy. Two people bound together by necessity, not trust. When the bandaging is done, she reaches into her cloak and produces a small purse. You glance inside. A few silver coins, far more than you would expect from a housemaid. Payment for your silence, as much as for your skill. You accept it with a nod, hiding the purse away as quickly as possible, but the visit is not over. She hesitates, twisting her hands together. There is one more thing, she murmurs. Can you write a note? Something to say I was here all night for a fever, my mistress. She cannot know I left the house. The request is dangerous. Forging records, lying to employers. These are risks that could land you in the stocks, or worse, if the wrong person learns of it. You consider refusing. You consider the overseer's threats from earlier, the eyes always watching, the rumors that travel faster than plague. But you also consider the coins, the cold hunger in your belly, and the fear in the woman's eyes. You write the note in a careful, looping hand, the letters large and clumsy. She clutches it to her chest, thanking you with tears in her eyes, before slipping out the door as quietly as she arrived. You watch her vanish into the darkness, heart pounding, mind racing with what you have just agreed to. You return to your bench, the purse heavy in your hand. The risk lingers, sharper than any wound. What if she is caught? What if someone talks? The overseer's words echo in your head. No surprises, no trouble. You pray that your name is not mentioned, that your note is burned, that the city's attention passes you by. But the fear does not leave. You imagine the knock on the door, guards with hard faces and harder hands, demanding to know what you know, dragging you away before you can protest. You picture the city turning on you, not for what you did, but for who you are. A man always at the edge of legality, always willing to do what must be done to survive. You sit in the gloom, staring at your stained hands. Every deal made in the dark is a new thread in the web that binds you, a new danger to keep you awake. The city's eyes are everywhere. The walls have ears. Your only real defense is silence and luck, and neither has been reliable of late. You check the door twice, then a third time, making sure it is locked. You tuck the purse away where only you will find it. You whisper a prayer, though you do not believe it will help. Tonight your shop is colder than usual, the shadows deeper, your sleep further away than ever. It is a long time before you allow yourself to close your eyes. When the city is finally still, when the footsteps fade and the lamp oil gutters out, you know it is time to close your shop for the night. This, too, is a ritual, and like all rituals in your world, it is not about hope or comfort, but survival. You move through it with the slow, deliberate care of a man counting his breaths, aware that every step you take is the last thing standing between you and chaos. First, you sweep the floor. The bristles of your broom are almost bare, and each pass stirs up a fine, choking dust mixed with hair, dried blood, splinters of bone, and whatever else the day has left behind. You scoop the pile into a broken pan, dump it into the alley, and watch as the wind whisks it away, scattering the proof of your existence into the city's night. You wonder how much of yourself has drifted away in such piles over the years. Next, you wipe down your bench, scrubbing at the stains with vinegar until your hands ache and your eyes water. Some of the spots are so old they might as well be painted on. You give up before you reach the end. There is no perfection here, only the difference between bad and worse. You wash your tools, dipping each blade and scissor into a bowl of tepid water before passing them through a candle flame. The metal hisses and pops, the stink of burned hair rising in the tiny room. You dry them on a scrap of linen, lay them in their box, and tuck it into its hiding place. You check the box twice, then a third time, running your fingers over each tool as if to reassure yourself they are real and yours and will be there in the morning. The blood basin you carry to the back step and empty into the gutter. The thick, sticky liquid oozes down the stones, joining the city's own nightly excretions. Sometimes you watch it for a while, following the red thread until it vanishes into the darkness. Tonight, you shut the door quickly, locking it behind you. Your shop, for all its filth, has its own kind of order, a place for everything, and everything in its place. The herbs are tied and hung to dry, the rags folded, the lamp trimmed and covered. You check the shutters, making sure each one is tight. The night is full of thieves and desperate men, and a careless shop is an open invitation to disaster. The final task is the door. You bar it with a heavy plank, sliding the bolt into place. It is an old door, swollen with age and cracked at the bottom, but it is all you have. Sometimes, when the wind howls, you press your back to it, imagining all the terrors kept at bay by a few inches of wood. With everything secured, you pause in the center of your shop. The room feels larger, emptier, as if all the misery of the day has been swept away with the dirt. In the silence, your thoughts crowd in, louder than any cry you heard that day. You remember faces, some grateful, some accusing. You remember the weight of the overseer's hand, the hollow eyes of the dying, the desperate bargains made in candlelight. You light a single taper and sit by its weak glow. You murmur the prayers your mother taught you, not because you expect an answer, but because it is what you have always done. The words feel small, almost childish, but they are a comfort, a reminder that for one more night You have survived. You look at your hands, cracked and stained, your nails rimmed with black. You flex your fingers, feeling every ache, every cut, every bruise. You wonder how many more days you can do this, how many more nights you can close your shop and pretend tomorrow will be different. For a moment, the emptiness feels vast, an endless gulf opening at your feet. You think of all the things you have lost: time, health, hope, perhaps even the chance at kindness. You remember a time when you thought you would be more than this, when you believed in the healing arts, in the possibility of helping rather than simply delaying the inevitable. But the night does not care for dreams. It only asks that you endure. So you blow out the taper, sit in darkness, and listen to the sounds of the city: a dog barking, a distant scream, the rumble of carts over cobblestones. Eventually, you rise and move to your bed, a lumpy pile of straw that promises neither rest nor comfort. You lie down, fully clothed, boots still on, knife at your side. You pull your thin blanket over your chest and stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks, listening to your own heartbeat. The emptiness of the shop is mirrored in the emptiness within you, but you have learned to live with it. It is a companion, a shield against hope. Tomorrow, the world will begin again, and you will rise to face it, tired, hungry, and unafraid, because fear is a luxury you can no longer afford. You close your eyes. The city does not sleep, but you try. The world outside your shuttered shop groans and mutters through the hours of darkness, but you, at least in theory, are finished with the day. You have completed your last ritual, muttered your last prayer, and stretched yourself on your straw filled mattress, boots and all. It is the closest you ever come to rest, and even that is a crude imitation. True sleep, like true cleanliness, is a memory you cannot quite believe in. You lie on your back and feel the familiar ache in your bones, the throbbing of your overworked hands, the stiff band around your chest that never fully loosens. The straw pokes through the threadbare blanket, prickling your skin. You curl around yourself as best you can, knees to chest, one arm draped over your knife. The city's cold presses in from every gap and crack. You tuck your head beneath your elbow, wishing for even a little warmth. Nightmares come quickly and easily. They know the way by now, slipping in like unwelcome guests. In your dreams, you are always working. Your tools are dull, your hands are clumsy. The wounds will not stop bleeding, and no one will wait their turn. You see the faces of clients, dead, dying, or simply desperate, mouthing silent accusations, their eyes luminous in the dark. Sometimes they ask for help you cannot give. Sometimes they do not speak at all, only stare. The worst dreams are not about blood or death or the slow rot of infection. The worst dreams are about hope. You see yourself in a clean shirt, in a place where water runs clear, where tools are sharp and plentiful, where the sick recover and the healthy stay that way. In those dreams, you have time to rest, a fire to warm your feet, bread that is soft and fresh. You wake from these dreams with a pang sharp as any wound, tasting the bitterness of loss, the knowledge that these things are for other men, not for you. Sometimes you dream of being found out, of the overseer or the guards pounding on your door, dragging you from your bed, the crowd outside baying for justice. You try to explain, but your mouth is full of straw and blood, your hands empty, your voice lost. When you wake, heart racing, you listen for real footsteps in the alley, real voices outside your door, but there is only the wind. You doze, wake, doze again. Each time you surface, the dark is a little deeper, your mind a little heavier. You think about all the things left undone, patience you could not save, debts unpaid, secrets shared in confidence that might one day destroy you. You count your failures like rosary beads, rolling each one between your tired fingers. In the quiet moments, you wonder about the city's other barbers. Jacob, with his back twisted by years at the bench, the miracle Italian, with his clean hands and expensive promises. Are they sleeping now? Do they dream of relief or of escape? Or do they lie awake, like you, staring at the ceiling and wishing for something nameless and out of reach? You shift on your straw, searching for a comfortable position and never finding one. The lice are restless, as if sharing in your unease. You scratch absently, thinking of your mother, your childhood, the days when pain was simpler and fear more distant. You remember being small, watching her bandage a cut, listening to her tell you stories about saints and kings. You realize, with a dull pang, that you have become the cautionary tale in someone else's story. There are moments just before dawn when your exhaustion grows so deep it becomes a kind of floating, untethered from body and worry. You drift for a few precious minutes in the borderlands of sleep. Here the world is neither good nor bad, only silent, only empty. It is the closest you come to peace, but the peace is always broken. A dog howls, a drunk sings, the city coughs and shifts its weight. You hear it all through thin walls and thinner dreams. Eventually, the darkness outside begins to lighten, just enough to see the outline of your battered tools, your ragged blanket, the cracked ceiling overhead. You rise before you are ready, before the world has softened even a little. The stiffness in your back, the hunger in your belly, the echo of nightmares in your head, all of it comes with you as you stand and begin again. You stretch, joints popping, skin itching, hair matted to your brow. You move through the motions as if you have done this forever, because you have. You splash your face with water, cold and foul, and chew a crust of stale bread. The taste is earthy, sour, but you eat every crumb. You check your tools, sharpen the razors, stir the ashes in the fire. Your hands tremble a little, but you steady them, whispering the old empty words of reassurance. Outside, the city is waking, dogs barking, bells ringing, the shouts of market sellers rising into the new day. You open your door, feeling the first breath of morning, already carrying the sink of 1,000 lives grinding on. You inhale deeply, wincing at the cold and the filth. Another day waits, another parade of sores and wounds, of fear and hope, of questions you cannot answer, and debts you cannot pay. There is no relief here, no ending, just the turning of the wheel. You face it as you always have, because you must. You mutter to yourself a benediction, a curse, or maybe just a tired joke. Good night, barber. You laugh, dry and small, and step forward into the day, because here the only true rest is the kind you do not wake from, and you are not ready for that. Not yet.